Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. To those of you that were in the session yesterday, the search architecture session, welcome back. To those of you that were not, welcome to you too. I assume a lot of you have experience in building database applications, and you are here today to learn about leveraging the full capacity of a search engine to build search-driven applications, in particular inside of SharePoint 2013. The stuff we're doing can also be used to build applications that are using other frontends, but since we are part of SharePoint, we're going to focus on the features in SharePoint in this session. If you did not attend the session yesterday, it gave a good foundation on search architecture, and you'll find the recording online. And I'll strongly recommend you to have a look at that later today if you have a chance. I'm here with Matt King. My name is Thomas Malbach, and together we have 20 years of experience or so with search, ever since the fast search engine was just a collection of binaries over 10 years ago. So what are we here to do today? We are going to show you how you can ingest content from different content sources. In particular, we're going to focus on developing a custom VCS connector for SharePoint, which means that you can put a lot of logic yourself in the feeder. Then we're going to show you how you can enrich the data and manipulate data on the way from the feeder to the index. And we're going to use what we call a content enrichment web service to achieve that goal. Number 3, we're going to show you different ways of customizing the user frontend. And we're going to use the search templates, result templates, in SharePoint to do that. Show you different customizations. And Matt, I think you're ready to show the end result today.
Sure. So probably most of you have seen the default search center. So we'll just start out with a simple search here. And this shows you the basic out-of-the-box search center with a hover panel. In this case, that doesn't show you very much because it doesn't know what to do with this document. And nothing very interesting over here.
And what documents do we have in the index, Matt?
Sorry. So these are recipes. So it's data has come from delish.com. And so it's got a bunch of rich text about the nutritional information and the directions and that kind of stuff. In particular, the nutritional information comes as an HTML blob, and we're going to pull out the number of calories out of that so that we can drive a refiner. And that's a very frequent search task, to be able to pull some data out of your existing documents or information or clean up a field to be able to make a search, to drive search. So at the end of the day, we're going to take the basic search center after we ingest the content, and we're going to make it look more like this. You can see how for each document we have a star rating, so this will show you how popular the document is. And on the left you can see, your right, you can see the recipe calories I talked about, as well as the category refiner that we've used jQuery plugin to make a nice little pie chart. And then the last thing we're going to do is pull in related recipes. So if you notice there was a little bit of a lag there, that's actually running a secondary query to pull up top-rated recipes from the same category.
So let's switch over to the deck again. So just to set the expectation, this is what the session is about. If you're not here to see development on the front end or the back end, it's better to leave now than giving us really bad feedback when we're done. Okay, so we have 4 main sections. We can do a very quick recap of the architecture so that you kind of understand the components involved in the search architecture. Then we're going to start by setting up the content enrichment step. We need that to be in place before we feed the content. And Matt is going to get back to what we're going to do in that step. We have 3 operations we're doing there. Then we're going to show you how to feed in the data from a custom source. And then at the end, we're going to show you different ways of customizing the front end like we just showed you in the demo. So let's start with the architecture overview. Here is an overview of the main components in search. And you also see how the different components interact. On the left side, you have the content okay. That's the session code for the architecture session from yesterday. So if you look that up, you can find the recording, and it goes into much more detail on the architecture. So let's focus on the content feeding part. We are going to build a content enrichment web service that is a call-out from the content processing pipeline. You set up one web service, and then you call out to there. And we're going to show you both the configuration and how you can build one. And this is well documented on TechNet. And by the way, we're going to show a lot of code and demos today. And don't panic, because everything is documented in blog articles. And we have a list of references towards the end of the presentation. Second, we're going to show you how to build a custom connector. You can also use the out-of-the-box connectors and leverage the content enrichment web service that way. But we want, since this is for developers, we want to show you how you can build it yourself. The quick and easy way, if you just have a little content, is basically to set up a list in SharePoint and use that as your data source. Then you're saving the whole step of feeding in from some other source. Then on the front end, we'll show you how to customize the result templates as a primary way. You can also build, as I said, applications in Java or other front ends using the REST API. We'll show you also how to use the client-side object model to perform other queries as part of the search result. One component in the query processing pipeline that is very important for building good experiences is the query rules framework. That's very easily accessible, both for business people and administrators. And we're not going to go into that, but that's something that you definitely want to leverage as part of your solution. All right, so now we're going to jump over to content enrichment. Content enrichment, as I mentioned, is a call-out, a web service call-out. And we're going to look at the configuration. The main two important parameters is the list of input properties and output properties to the web service. You set up what parameters that are transferred over, so you don't transfer over all the data to the web service. And the same way, you set up what properties are coming back from the web service. Also note that you don't have access to absolutely all properties. One example is the ACL property. You cannot modify the ACL property. You also cannot modify the body property, for example. But you can add new managed properties if you want, and you can also modify most of the properties that are coming in there. One important thing to note is that you cannot use the aliases. You can set up alias for the properties when you configure the search schema, but you have to use the real names when you send them over to the content enrichment web service.
Right. Another thing to remember there, real quick, is on the debug mode. If you set debug mode to true, it shows you all the properties, but it ignores all of the outputs. So you have to sort of use that with caution.
Okay, Matt, and now we're going to go over to the demo.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, we have some rich, we have some HTML code that are coming in our incoming documents, and we're going to just pull out the calorie information. We're going to make a call out to find out the rating for each document based on the URL. And then the last thing we're going to do is show you how to reject documents. And this is a new capability in 2013 that wasn't available in 2010, where you can actually send an error back from this call out, and then the crawler won't send it to the indexer. And this can be very useful to reject certain documents. In this case, if you've done BCS before, you've probably noticed that you get these little Hubi documents, the BDC3 documents, that are sort of the container documents of the crawl, but they end up in your index anyways, and they can show up in search results, and it's very annoying. So we'll just show you how to easily reject those. Oh, I should do the demo before we move on.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so we're going to fire up Visual Studio. I'm going to start it as administrator because we're going to be publishing this out to IIS. And I will create a new project. So this isn't a SharePoint-specific project. This is just a regular old WCF application. So RCP, I'll just call it that. Of course, it'll be slow. So it's gonna give us a couple sample files that we don't care about, so I'll go ahead and get rid of those as well. Now, before we start coding, the one thing you need to do to make this a web service callout is you need to pull in a reference. Sorry. I've done this before on this machine, so it shows up here. If you're first time in, you'll have to navigate yourself to the Microsoft Office servers, search applications external. There's only one DLL there, so it's pretty easy to remember which one to use. All right, so now rather than type a lot, I'm going to actually just pull in an existing item here real quick. Work. And we'll have a look at that. So the only thing in this DLL is actually this iContent processing enrichment service. And the only method that needs to be defined with that interface is this processed item method. The input of this is the item that has the properties that you've set are the input properties. And the output is the process item that can contain any of the output properties. You don't need to send back any of the output properties that you declared, but you can only send those or it'll cause an error. Inside of it, it's really pretty straightforward code. I won't go into great detail, but we just do a loop over the item properties, and for each one, we'll take whatever actions needed. I'm going to note the item number. So every recipe has an item number. It's sort of the unique key. And I'm going to use this to determine whether or not this is an actual recipe document, because I know that those little container documents don't have an item number. Next, I'll look if it's the URL property. I'm going to do my lookup to find out my rating, and then I'm going to stuff that back in as an output property. Same thing for parsing out the calories. I'll call it to parse the calories. And then I'll set my error codes. If something unexpected happened, I'll set an error code for that. The error codes can be anything you want. If it's a 0, then the document's considered a success. If it's non-zero, then it's an error. And if I get a -1, I'm going to say that's a rejected error.
And one thing to note, Matt, about the error code is if you are setting the error codes, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be touched ever again.
Right. SharePoint considers it a transient error. So the next time you do an incremental crawl, it's going to go out and fetch that document again and retry it. So this would be, potentially this could be very nice for doing like offensive content filtering or some other kind of large-scale filtering of your content that you don't want in the search index. But right now, that could have performance implications because you're going to be recrawling that every time. There's some hope that that may change and have an option of making it persistent or transient. The last thing I'll do is I'll just tag the processing time. So this is a new property I'm going to add to the document. So I'll do a quick build of this to make sure it's going to actually work, and then we'll publish it. So I've already set up an IIS site for this, but I'll go ahead and connect to that now. We'll test that and publish.
And there's no magic here. This is just a normal web service deployment, right?
So now this .service URL is the one that we need to actually register with SharePoint, so I'll make a copy of that. Before we actually register it, I'm just going to quickly show you, if you've done WCF service building before, you probably know about this, but Visual Studio comes with this little test client. We can go ahead and connect to that. And that will let us test out our service before we actually try it out. As I mentioned, there's only the process item method. Actually sending in properties is a little bit cumbersome, so I'm just going to invoke it with no properties, and we'll see that we get an error code of 3 back, which is the rejected error, which is what we want. And we can see that we get back our last process time. So it's doing pretty much what we told it to do. To register, it's pretty easy. We're going to use PowerShell for that. And the way it works is you create this object called the SP Enterprise Search Content Enrichment Configuration object, and you set the parameters as you saw in the table in the slideshow. We're going to have these 3 input properties and then 3 output properties. The other thing to note here is we've set a trigger so that only our recipes content source will go through here. So when we process our local SharePoint documents, we don't do any processing on them. They won't go in. There's actually a very rich trigger language here, so you can do lots of tests with nested Boolean logic. But at the end of the day, you only have one web service to call out to. Then we'll set that with another PowerShell command. And the last thing we'll do is just echo it back to see that it worked. So I will click go on that, and we should see it happen. One, two, three. There we go. So here we see it looks pretty much like what we sent in, which is what we want. All right, so now we've got this registered, and we'll switch over to...
So Matt, before you leave there, a quick recap, right? So you extract metadata from the body field.
Yep.
You pull out the calorie count, so we can use that when we're doing a fielded search, for example.
Yep.
Number 2 is that you're adding in new metadata. You're adding the star rating.
Right.
And I think you just had some code lines for making random star ratings, but
Yes.
that could be pulled from
an external system or wherever you need to look it up from.
Right. And number 3 is that you set it up to reject the BCS container documents.
Correct.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at is the content ingestion. So how do we get the content into the system? I showed you that already, that we have a number of connectors that come with the product for BCS. But I would like to use this slide to explain how the crawling works. In SharePoint 2013, there is no push mechanism, so you cannot push content directly to the search index in 2013. But so the way the crawler works is that you set up timed jobs, and you can set them up to as little as you want, but it takes about 2 minutes, 2 to 2.5 minutes of overhead every time it kicks off. The first process that starts off is to read all the IDs, and then you have workers that are picking up the next batch. So you can have a number of workers, both for performance and for failover. They will take the next batch available. And that's the way you need to think when you're building the BCS. And I'll get back to that in the next slide. So what we're going to do here is to build a custom BCS connector, and we'll show you the parameters and what you need to think about to make it ready for search. BCS is a framework that has 2 main purposes in SharePoint. One of the purposes is to be able to expose external data inside of a SharePoint environment. So for example, you can set up a list in SharePoint that is displaying data that lives inside a database or that lives inside of SAP or some other line of business system. But you can also use it as a source for search. And you can either set it up with a configuration using OData or a SQL statement, or you can build it with code. And we're going to build WCF because I think that's what we developers do. Yeah. So let me start off by explaining the method calls and the way you need to think about it when you're building this. First, you're getting, for a full crawl, you're getting a finder method. And it's basically asking you to return all the IDs of the documents that are in your source system. And this is one process that is independent of the next method calls that you'll see. So there's no sequence. It's not going to ask for a batch of finders and then a batch of metadata. It's that finder is running from the crawler admin node, and it's just throwing it into the database for the crawler worker nodes to pick up. So next, you're getting the specific finder for each of the IDs. And for each of the IDs, you're going to return the metadata about the document. So metadata might be all you have for most of your data if you basically just have database records. But if you do have a document associated with the records, you will also get a stream accessor request. And that's where you're streaming in your Word document, your PowerPoint, or some binary data, which is going to be cracked open in the document processing framework. So this is for a full crawl. Later, for the incremental crawls, you'll get 2 other methods. You'll get the changed ID enumerator, which is basically asking for all the IDs that have changed. And you'll get the deleted ID enumerator that's asking for all the records that have been deleted. Note that if you don't implement those, it will do a full crawl every time. So you will want to do that. Okay, Matt, I think you'll take this.
Sure. So out of the box, or if you take an existing BCS implementation, it's not quite ready for search. So there's a number of things you need to do to make it really enabled to do search efficiently and at scale. The first category of changes you need to do are for enabling this experience. To begin with, you need to actually make it show up as a search source, and you do that by setting the show and search UI flag. This is in the BDCM configuration file. We'll show you where this goes a little bit later. And the important thing to know is it exists. If you go out and Bing for that, you'll get to the right place. The next one, as Thomas mentioned, is the stream accessor. If you have a binary document, the only way to get it parsed as cracked open as a document is using the stream accessor. And then the last one is this display URI field. This is used to, if your content has a URL that you want the user to click to from the search results, by default, the BCS is just going to put a BDC3 URL in, which won't be very helpful for your users. The only way to override that without actually playing JavaScript games is by setting the particular field as the URL. There are a number of other things, the BCS, you can set the title and the author and the date and some other things, but all of those you can handle with crawl to manage property mappings. So this is the one you need to remember to do, otherwise you'll be stuck down the road. The next thing you have to do is plan for volume. Before, when Thomas said the Finder returns all the IDs, and you said, well, I have 20 million documents, how's that going to work? The answer is it's not going to work when you go into production. It's very easy to get the BCS to page once you know how to do it, and once you know the right little magic bits to put in, we'll show you how to do that. The other thing, if you look at a default BCS, like if you create a new one in Visual Studio, you'll see that the Finder is returning all of the properties. And there are some scenarios where you actually want to do that, but for search, all it does is take the ID and throws everything else away and then calls your specific Finder anyways. So if you have very rich documents and you're passing back all that information twice, that could affect your performance. And then the last one to know is that you can influence the crawler speed, either making go up or down using crawler impact rules. That's actually, there's a little bit of a note on the crawl source page, but some people don't realize that it's there. And then the last one, Thomas mentioned incremental crawling. If you create a BCS source and don't set up for incremental crawling, you'll still have the option when you try to start a crawl to do an incremental crawl, but it's just going to do a full crawl anyways. So it'll work fine in development, but when you go to production, you'll wonder why your incrementals take as long as your full crawls. So we'll show you how to do that as well. So now we'll actually do it. We're going to import the model. So Thomas tried to get me to cut out all of the live demoing, not all of it, but some of it. I believe that I should actually be indexing content to an empty system, and that's what we're going to be doing today.
And I voted for having the data in the system already, because if we don't get the data in there, I have a problem with my demos.
So for sequencing, we need to actually import the model first before we get to looking at the BCS implementation. So we're going to import the model and get a crawl going first, and then I'm going to show you what we did.
And it better work.
It will work.
Okay.
Is there a bet there? Anybody? All right.
You tell me.
I don't know. It's going to work. So we'll go into Managed Service Applications and click on our Business Data Connectivity Service, and we will manage it. And you'll see we don't have anything right now, so we'll go ahead and import one. So these BDCM files are just XML files, and we'll show you what it looks like a little bit later, but for now we're just going to import it. And you can optionally put your permissions inside of it, which I've done, so I'll just make sure that's checked. So I've actually started the service up already. You can see that I ran through it a couple times. I wrote this service as a console host just so I can get some output of what's going on. It's important that the service was running because when I import here, it's actually going to go out and ping the service and pull down the WSDL and make sure all of the methods are actually defined.
And Matt, when you import that model, that basically enables you to select that as a source for content,
yes.
Right?
So now I've got my recipe entity, and it has a number of properties. Because of time constraints, we've already gone through and created the crawled properties and the crawled property mappings to the managed properties. We can show anybody how that's done afterwards, but for the sake of time, we had to skip that part.
Or you can look at the demo we did yesterday in the architecture session where we set up a mapping between crawled and managed properties. That's the missing link here.
All right, so now we have we have that set up, we can actually go into the search service application, and I will show you that there's nothing up my sleeve. We have no recipes content source, so there's no data. And I will create one. Recipes. BCS comes as line of business data. There is still the iFilter interface in 2013, so that's another way to get external content in, but it's a bit esoteric and not that often used.
So that last thing you checked off there, Matt, that's where my custom BCS connector show up, right?
This is what I called it. If you have multiple BCS sources, you can choose to pick just one per content source or do them all. And then I'll go ahead and create it, and we'll start it up. All right. So now that's crawling. Let's take a quick look at the implementation. As Thomas mentioned, we've got a link at the end of this that's going to point you to a project that has this. It doesn't have exactly the same thing because we can't distribute the content, but it has all of the same bits and pieces enabled, so don't worry about the details just right now. The important thing to see is that we have an interface that's going to match pretty closely to what you saw on the interaction between the BCS. We have our finder method that I called get batched recipes. To do the paging, it uses a cookie, which in this case I just declared as a string, and your service can do whatever it wants with this. The BCS is going to store that cookie between calls and hand it back to you, so your service remains stateless. So you could handle multiple SharePoints from one service if you wanted to. The has more is just going to allow you to tell when you're done paging through, so it's pretty straightforward. The other ones follow suit. We have the specific finder, which takes an item number and returns an actual recipe, et cetera, et cetera. I'll skip past a little bit. Down here we have our actual entity, and this corresponds directly to the entity that you saw in the BCS. So we have our title, we have our URL, et cetera. Looking inside the implementation of the service, I'll just look at the first one here. The finder method. Again, takes the cookie. In this case, I'm just going to keep an integer saying how far I am through my list. This is really just dummy data in a CSV file that I'm pulling in. But in a production system, you could use whatever made sense here. One thing I will note is that the incremental crawl methods actually do get called on a full crawl as well, because they're going to have their own cookie. And this allows you to initialize them so that if anything happens during the full crawl, it'll get picked up on the first incremental crawl.
I got my data.
You got your data? That's good.
Sorry.
You just
excited.
Killed our suspense. All right. Dang. Okay, so there's really not much to hear. I'm just going to skip through now to the XML. So here you can see the interior of the XML. There is a sort of a Visual Studio BDCM editor that's a little more, some people like that better. I tend to like to know what's in the XML, so I work directly in the XML. You can do whichever you prefer. One thing is you sort of hard code your service in here, so you have to put the host name and the port where it's running and all of that. And it actually goes in two places. You can see here's the show and search UI. This is the one that makes it search enabled. And we'll just go down and look at that finder method again. So here I've declared a method called getBatchRecipes. The cookie here has some XML goo to set up the types. And then I return a list of recipes that just have an item number. All right. Now, as Thomas mentioned, it worked.
Yes.
But I'll go quickly into the crawl log here, and you'll see that we had 200 successes. That's how many documents I'd loaded. And we have 2 errors. And if I click through here, you'll see that the item failed during content processing web service, which is exactly what we wanted. These are the BDC3 container documents.
So that also proves that the callout is working.
Yes, so the callout is working. If I run a quick search here, this is against the same search service application, and I'm searching for recipe calories equals to 400. So this is a field that wasn't in the content data. We added it in during the extraction. So that shows that the extraction was working. And I'll leave it at that. You'll note that we don't have any of the UI stuff, and we'll get to that in a second. All right. So Does anybody know what this is on the screens here? Just call it out. Does anybody recognize it? Which particular XSLT? What? Yes, the search results. And I don't know about you guys, but this was sort of my least favorite part of working with SharePoint 2010 was dealing with XSLT to create HTML. And I think it was a problem for a lot of customers, and I think it caused a lot of people not to do very much with the search results page. In 2013, that all goes away. So there's no more XSLT, and it's what's called display templates. These are HTML and JavaScript that are used to produce HTML and JavaScript. It's a very nice match because it is what you're doing. One of the most helpful parts of this is you can use any tool you want to edit these. You can do them in Dreamweaver, you can do them in Notepad, doesn't matter. You can do it, and importantly, you can do it with what your designers do. So your designers can actually design SharePoint directly. Another feature is that you can easily render on different devices. We're not going to get into details on that in this presentation, but it's a very powerful part of the new display templates.
And the way this works, Matt, is that SharePoint has some special tags that all these tools will just treat as comments. But you'll see it when I'm starting to modify the templates, that they're very powerful. And when you're done editing and you upload them, they will be converted to JavaScript behind the scenes. So it's going through a processing step before SharePoint starts using it.
So there's a number of these templates. We have a couple different categories of them. The first one has these control templates that sort of handle the overall page structure, the paging elements, and things like that. We have item templates that we'll go into detail about, and Thomas is going to show you how to work with those to target different item templates for different things. So for example, if it's from a recipe, we're going to use a special template. And then the last category is sort of special purpose things like the refiners, and we'll show you how to change the refiner and swap out the pie chart. To do the display items, the item templates, you use what's called result types. And these result types are very simple things. There's a condition that you set. Is it a green apple? Is it a red apple? And then you set the name of the display template to call. And so when it's rendering the results, it's just, for each one, it's going to do that test and then pick which result type to choose, or display template to choose.
And out of the box, you have display templates for Word and Excel that are different, and site templates, stuff like that. You'll see that they are rendered slightly differently. And when you're starting to code, best practice is to create your own custom instead of updating that default one. There's one called item default that everything falls back to.
Right. So these are all kept in the master page gallery. Thomas will show you that in a minute. And the easiest thing to do is just map that to the File Explorer. And at that point, you have it as just another file. And this is where you can use any tool you want to work on them and copy and save them back into SharePoint. As Thomas mentioned, you can copy them. You also, that's all I really want to say here. Let's move on. For result types, it's similar. You can't edit the default result type, so you're saved that indignity. But you can copy existing ones, and you can set preferences, so you can make your own one that does the same thing as the existing one and takes precedence. Once you set it up, the really nice thing is this is all sort of instantaneous. Once you make a save and hit reload on your page, you get the results back. So it's a very quick turnaround time.
And just a quick comment, Matt, you say you cannot change the default ones. The reason is that it's kind of inheriting the whole hierarchy from the central admin. But what you can do instead is to disable them for a particular site collection or site, and then create your own version that takes over instead. So you have full control over all the display templates for all the result types in the system. Okay, so now we're gonna do the simplest possible example. We're gonna take the result template and we're gonna put in the star rating. So I'm gonna show you how we go ahead to do that. So let me just search the collection first for cake. And now I have the out of the box. This is what I get if I did nothing else. You will notice that I have the Enterprise Search Center and not just the standard one. And you have to start off with the Enterprise Search Center to get the HTML versions of the result templates. If you start with the standard one, you'll only get the JavaScript. So that's not very useful when you're doing development. When that's said, it's also worth commenting that you will need eCal for most of the stuff that we've done today. The standard cal will not enable you to do the content extraction, content enrichment web service, and it will not enable you to edit these templates. Okay, so where we go in, and I'm going to go in there a lot of times today, into site settings, and go in and look at the master pages and page layouts. It's much easier to work with this library inside of the File Explorer, so let me just open this in File Explorer.
So if you're going to be doing this on the server, on a server installations, remember that you have to enable the look and feel feature on the server in order to make this happen.
And if you go, you see you have a separate folder for display templates, and you have one for search. The other one that is important in here is the one called filters. That's the internal name for the refiners that you see on the left side when you're doing searches. So right now I'm going to modify the set up a custom item type. So what I'll do is to just start the default one and make a copy. Well, let me do that. And then rename that to item recipe. And if I refresh the list, you'll see that every time you do changes in this library, which again is a SharePoint library, there's a workflow that picks it up and compiles a JavaScript in the background. So you see that it's doing that every time. Okay, so let's go in and have a look at what this looks like. So I'll just open this in Visual Studio. So the first thing you need to do, and the reason is because you're picking this value when you're setting up a result type, is to change the title. So let me change that to recipe item. Then you need to have a look at the list of incoming properties. These are mapped to local variables for my script. So I'll add, I need a category rating or this recipe rating in here. So I'll just put in a little piece of code, a little mapping. And I have most of these things as snippets, so don't kill me here. So now I set up a mapping and map the recipe rating as an internal variable so I can access it in the script. The next thing we need to do, let's see. Line 12, line 19. I'm going to include a little script. So to simplify all the demos, I put most of the logic in a separate script. So I need to just include that script here. So let me do that here. So you'll see I'm basically putting in a script tag to get to JavaScript. And then I'm using include script, and I'm including this starrating.js script. And what that script is doing is basically to build up the HTML to display 3, 4, 5 stars. I have it open here, star rating. So you see it's basically a little code to add stars and half stars depending on the value. I mean, this is just normal code, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. The last thing I need to do is to display the stars. So let's go down here. So this div tag is the one that is actually showing the metadata. So I'll put it in at the end of the text here. Insert snippet 39. So you see that I'm basically just calling out to the rating HTML, which is in the script, and I'm using the recipe rating that we got in as a mapped property. Now I'm going to save this, and again, when I'm saving it, it's compiling it to JavaScript, and then we can go back to my search experience. Let's search for cake. And as you can see, it does not show up. And the reason it doesn't show up yet is because I haven't set up a special result type for my recipes. So let's do that as the last step. So I go into site settings and have a look at result types. And we need to just create a custom one for recipes. So I'm just gonna, what I'm gonna do is to basically take the URL, because when Matt is feeding it in, he's feeding it in with a special URL. So I'll just have a look at the path property. Path. And just starts with any of, and then I have a little HTTP. Contosofoods.com. So everything that is matching that path will get my new result template. And then it's asking, what is it going to look like? And now you should see recipe item as a new entry in here. And we get it here, and I'd say optimize for frequent use, because this is my search applications. It's going to be used very, very often. So we save this, and we go back, and we search again. And,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
There we go.
Well done, Thomas.
Well, I'm not supposed to clap.
Self-clap.
Thank you. So as you can see, it takes a few seconds before it kicks in. All right, over to you, Matt.
All right, great. So the next thing we want to do is we want to use jQuery to build that nice pie chart for the refiner. A couple notes on using jQuery is that it needs a little special care because it's a fairly large library. So we're going to have to approach that a little differently than what you just saw with Thomas when he loaded it in that JavaScript. But once you get it in, it's really nice because you can then use jQuery to do anything you want, obviously. You can pull in third-party things. If you have developers that know jQuery already, they can go nuts and make SharePoint do pretty much anything. There's a couple options for including scripts into display templates. The first one is you can just have a script tag. Or you can use the include script, which is what Thomas did. Both of these are OK for small snippets. But for large scripts, because the display templates are actually being loaded after the page is rendered, you have timing problems because you can't use the DOM loaded event to know when the script's been loaded. So SharePoint has provided a feature called SharePoint Script on Demand, or SOD. And this can set up a contract saying, don't call my code until this other code's been loaded. So that's what Thomas will show you how to use in a second. Alternative for going to production, and probably the recommendation for going to production, would be to load it in your master page, especially if you're going to be using this all over your site. Obviously, it's not worth loading it on every item template. So with that, I'm going to quickly give it back to Thomas, and he'll show you how to do jQuery.
So before you switch there, so our task is basically to take, we have a recipe category that's coming in as metadata, and I think that's coming directly from the source. And instead of showing it as a boring flat text definer, we're going to show it as a pie chart. And you have a lot of nice jQuery libraries out there, so you can just imagine the kind of power you get access to by using jQuery as part of the front end. We're kind of jumping one step forward this time. So I'm going to start directly in the display templates. And as I said, the definers, the templates there, they're built in the same way as for the results, but they are in the filters directory. So I'm going in here, and again, we're starting with the default filters. I'll make a copy of that. And as you can see, I've cheated a little bit here because I already have the jQuery library in here. So you need to copy that in somewhere yourself. No, I'm not calling this recipe. I'm calling it pie chart. Pie chart. And as you can also see, I have cheated a little bit more by putting in the logic for invoking the pie chart component in a separate script. So I'll show you how we get that in later. Okay, so let's go in and open this one in Visual Studio. Again, one thing that we need to do is to update the title. When we are configuring the refiners in the Search Center, you get a textual description to choose from, and it's kind of hard to select when all of them are called refinement item. So let me call this a pie chart refiner. And then we need to include our scripts, just like Matt talked about. So again, I have a little snippet that we can include. Line 19. So here you see, first of all, I'm including the pie chart script that I have written to invoke the pie chart. Then we have all these libraries that we are including, and those we are including them on demand, as Matt explained. And the last thing we need to do is to set up the dependency between the libraries. So you need to make sure that the jQuery is loaded before JQplot, that JQplot is before the pyrender. So this is the way you configure this. And lastly, this library requires a CSS, so we're just using the out-of-the-box CSS file. So if you have a look at the default refiners, you're going to see there's a lot of code in here. And a lot of that code is actually to consolidate values. So to give you one example, here's a mapping for PowerPoints. So the files come in, and the values are populated as PPT, PPTM, PPTX, but we want to display PowerPoint. So if you ever need to manipulate the values in any way, here is the place to do that, and have a look at the code that is in there. Then we're going to jump down to the container that has the display. Let me see, 273. So this container is the one that is actually doing the logic of displaying it. It has a lot of useless code that I don't really need right now. So let me just get rid of all the stuff in here. One more. So now we have an empty container, and I'll just cheat a little bit and replace this with my code. And the code I'm putting in here is basically to invoke the pie chart library. Let's see, line 272. So you see we set up some variables up here, and then we are including the pyrender function. And we're using that setup pie chart filter that we have in our external filter, external script here. It's basically just stacking up the values and packing them neatly in and sending it into the library. So let's save this. And again, what it's doing behind the scenes is to generate this JavaScript that is being used internally. And let's go back to our display and search. And now you're still not seeing it, right? Because we need to configure the refiner. And the refiners you'll see if you edit the page. And what we can also do here is to get rid of this search navigation that we don't really need as part of our experience. So I'm going to delete this. And then we're going to have a look at the refiners. Edit web part. And unlike 2010, in 2013 you have a beautiful configuration screen as a replacement of the dreaded XSLT. So this is something you should enjoy. What do we call it again? The recipe category. And you'll see you even get sample values while you're working on it, and that's really neat. So that so you get a feeling of what type of data you have to work with. So let's name this category. And here you see why I don't want to call all of them refinement item. Let's pick the pie chart refiner. And then click OK. And save. And let's see if we get, and here you already see the pie chart refiner coming up. I'll just save the page. And we have our pie chart refiner.
Yay.
And this is pretty powerful for 10 minutes of coding. Right, back to you, Matt.
Right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be adding in the related recipes by doing a secondary query. And we're going to do that using the client object model. In 2013, that's been exposed as a JavaScript programming language as well. This is similar to, for this purpose, it's similar to jQuery in that it's a large script, so we're going to be using a similar technique to load it in. But once you have it ready to go, you can do lots of fun things with your search results, or use this anywhere. You can use this anywhere within SharePoint to make searches. As I mentioned, we're going to use the script on demand to pull it in. Once you have it in, it works a lot like the client-side object model that you might have used in C#. You have a keyword query, the keyword query object, and then you call the search executor. The only difference is then we're going to use jQuery to inject the results back into the page.
And Matt, I don't understand why we got the feedback that our pictures have absolutely nothing to do with the content.
There's a Norwegian involved in that story, but we won't get into that right now.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is to use the client-side object model, which is the preferred way when you're working on the result templates, because you can just use it in Visual Studio and you get immediate results. The REST API is primarily when you're using external sources of some kind. Okay, so we're basically going to enhance the hover panel, and we're going to put in the highest ranked recipes from the same category. So we're taking out the category, and we are doing a new query. So every time you hover over something, you'll perform a query. So let's switch over. So here's what I have. This is the out-of-the-box experience, and this doesn't do anything good. I mean, if you work 5 more minutes on this, you obviously also want to put in a picture in there, and you want to put in properties and nice text. That's something that you should know how to do by looking at the star rating example. But instead, I'll focus on invoking a new query and using the client-side object model. Okay, so let's again go over to our result templates. And I'm going back to display templates and search, where we find the hover panel. I didn't touch that code in my recipe item. So, but right now it's invoking the default hover panel. So let me make a copy of this. And let's call it a recipe hover panel. Okay, so now I have a copy of the default one. But before we start editing that file, I need to make sure that our recipe item is invoking this panel when it's showing the hover panel. So let me go into the recipe again and do a couple of updates there. Open with. So here we have the line item for default hover panel. I'm changing that to recipe hover panel. I also need to, so to save time, I'm including a script. I've cheated again, so I put the code for invoking the client-side object model in a separate script. It's called recipe search, so we have it here. It's basically building up a query, executing it, and packing in the result and sending it back to me. So you can look at that in the blog article later. But this is not really the magic. The magic happens in the templates. So let me go back. And what I want to do is to just make sure that this script is loaded instead of loading it every time you show the hover panel. So I'll just include that here. There's a snippet. Oops, I got a little double here. So now you see I have the recipe search script loaded here. And then last, what I want to do is to just make sure that that it updates our display templates. So I'll just put in a new, to trigger that, I'm just putting in a new mapping in here. And this is just a trick that I'm doing as part of the demo to make sure that it's updating the display templates. Okay, so I'll save this file and then go back. And now we need to look at our hover panel. So I'll open this in Visual Studio. Okay. So I mean, this title is not really used anywhere, so I'm going to skip to name it. You don't see that ever in the configuration or administration screens. But what I want to do is to add in a little more mapping, because I need to take the category and send that into the query. So I'm inserting another mapping in here. So basically, I have the recipe category available right here. And then I need to go down to... So now what I'm going to do is to put in a call out to my script to perform that query asynchronously as part of my display here. So I'll just put it in after the body of the hover card. You see it has a header, a body, and a footer. And that's the lines that you see in the default hover card. So I'll put in the code to invoke that script. And you see it's basically a post-render callback. So it's an asynchronous callback after the rest of the page has been rendered. So let's see if we're able to save this. And hope that's going to work. And then go back to the search screen. Refresh our page. And we got our queries back, our results. You see top-rated recipes. Over to you, Matt.
All right, so that's pretty much our content. This is our promised take-home resources page. So the top one here is the BCS for search. This is a whole project, the Visual Studio project that you need to start out with a BCS for search. You can then use this to build whatever you need to. There's an entry for the content enrichment service. This is the TechEd article, but it gives you everything you really need. Our colleague Murad has done the pie chart that Thomas just showed you, as well as the other UI things. So all of that's right there. Another plug from MCS guys is the survival guide. This is a search-specific survival guide for SharePoint 2013. So this is a very good place to get lots of stuff. And the last bit is we wanted to do some stuff on relevancy, but there really wasn't time to stick it all in. So there's a really deep thing into the relevancy of SharePoint.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work done on relevancy model in 2013, but again, we haven't had time to cover that also in this session.
And there's room to do a lot of customization there, but it's sort of it needs its own session.
Okay, so I hope that when you go away from this session that you appreciate the content we made, and that when you are filling out the evaluations, you keep that in mind. It's a lot of work to prepare these sessions, so I hope you appreciate it, and keep that in mind when you fill out the evals. Thank you so much. We open